Baby girl found a starving German shepherd in a trash bag. What happened next will break you. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a moment in time that will stay with you forever. A moment that tested the strength of a child, the loyalty of a dog, and the fragile line between tragedy and triumph. This isn't fiction. It happened. And it might just change the way you see the world. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This story deserves to be heard. It was still dark outside when the first light of dawn gently stretched across the rooftops of Westfield's quieter streets. The world was silent, too early for car horns, too early for birdsong, too early even for grown-up worries. But one little girl was already awake. Her name was Emily. At 6 years old, Emily had the kind of innocence the world had not yet chipped away at. She believed in sidewalk chalk, in pink hearts on brick walls, and that every creature deserved a warm place to sleep. Her mother often found her outside at strange hours, always in her slippers, always with chalk-stained fingers, always chasing something she couldn't name. That morning, Emily tiptoed out of her back door while her mother was still asleep. She didn't mean to sneak out, not in the naughty way. She just wanted to draw a rainbow on the alley wall before the sun came up, before the neighbors walked by and smudged her art with grown-up feet. Her little boots crunched over dry leaves as she made her way toward her favorite spot, the alley behind the dumpster where nobody ever looked. But that morning, something felt different. She paused. At first, she thought it was the wind, a faint rustling, like plastic bags brushing against each other. The alley always had some mess in it, takeout boxes, wrappers, that one broken scooter someone left to rot. But this sound didn't belong. It was too soft, too alive. And then it came again. A whimper. So faint, so desperate, it made her tiny body go still. Emily stood frozen, her fingers clenching the yellow chalk piece in her hand like it was her only weapon. Her eyes scanned the shadows, landing on a pile of garbage bags stacked near the old, dented dumpster. One of them had moved. She took one hesitant step forward. The cold wind nipped at her nose. The smell hit her first, a mix of rot, wet cardboard, and something else she didn't recognize but instinctively feared. Her heart began to beat faster, not in panic, but in some deep, primitive alarm she didn't understand. Another whimper. Emily's lips trembled. She looked back at the door to her home, barely visible now in the early haze. But something inside her, some thread of compassion she didn't know she had, pulled her forward. Step by slow step, she approached the bag that had moved. It was black, thick plastic, and bulging in the middle. A red twist tie barely held the top closed. The bottom of the bag was wet, stained with something brown. She didn't want to get closer. She didn't want to know. But the sound came again. The bag shifted. She gasped and stumbled backward, her chalk falling from her hand and rolling into a puddle. Her eyes locked onto the bag as her knees hit the ground. For a moment, she thought she saw nothing but trash, until the bag twitched again. And then, two eyes, glowing faintly, barely open, watching her. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The face was covered in dirt, fur matted and torn, blood crusted around its snout. It was a dog. A big one. Or it had once been. Now it looked like a skeleton wrapped in fur, ribs sticking out, body trembling, legs tied with something she couldn't see. The dog didn't bark. It didn't growl. It just looked at her. Pleadingly. Emily did what only a child would do. She whispered, "Are you okay?" And then she ran. Not away, not out of fear. She ran home. Her slippers slapping the pavement. Tears stinging her cheeks even though she didn't understand why she was crying. She burst through the kitchen door where her mother, Rachel, had just started the kettle. Rachel turned sharply. "Emily? What on earth?" There's a dog in the trash bag, Mommy. He's dying." At first, Rachel didn't move. She blinked, wondering if this was a game or the result of a bad dream. But something in Emily's face, the color drained from her cheeks, the wildness in her eyes, made her grab her coat without another word. Emily led her mother back to the alley, pointing with a trembling finger. Rachel approached the bag slowly, cautiously. She crouched and reached out to untwist the top, all while Emily clutched her arm and said, "Be gentle. He's hurt." As the plastic peeled away, the smell hit Rachel full force, and she recoiled for a second. But then she saw him. The German Shepherd lay crumpled inside the bag like discarded furniture. His eyes flickered, barely conscious. His fur was soaked in filth. Around his legs, electrical wire dug into the skin. Bruises, burns, old wounds. This wasn't an accident. Rachel's breath caught. For a long, heavy moment, she just stared. Then, slowly, she shrugged off her coat, wrapped the animal in it, and pulled him from the bag. Emily knelt beside him, gently placing her small hand on his ear. The dog didn't flinch. "Mommy, he's still alive." Rachel swallowed hard. "Get in the car. We're taking him to the vet. Right now." No more questions. No hesitation. And just like that, on a quiet morning in a forgotten alley, something extraordinary happened. A little girl found more than a dog in a trash bag. She found a beginning to a story of pain, of survival, and of a bond that neither time nor trauma could break. And the dog? The dog found hope. Rachel didn't scream, not out loud, but inside, her heart was beating against her ribs like a drum of panic. She had seen terrible things in her life, had watched news reports filled with cruelty, had cried over documentaries she couldn't finish. But this was something else. This was real. This was 5 feet from her back door. The garbage bag twitched again, a slow, jerky movement that made her stomach twist. Her daughter, Emily, clung to the edge of her coat, her little fingers digging in with silent urgency. Neither of them moved at first. The world around them, the still houses, the empty sky, the frozen grass, seemed to vanish. All that existed now was this one black bag and the thing inside it. Rachel crouched down slowly. Her hands trembled as she reached for the twisted knot at the top of the plastic. A deep part of her didn't want to know what was inside. Because what kind of person ties a creature inside a trash bag? What kind of soulless monster does that? The first thing that hit her was the smell. Not just trash. Not just urine. But the unmistakable stench of rotting flesh. Her nose burned and she nearly gagged. She yanked her scarf over her mouth, eyes watering, and continued opening the bag. And then there he was. A dog. Or what was left of one. He was massive, or would have been once. A full-grown German Shepherd, now reduced to skin stretched over bone. His fur was caked with filth, dark patches of blood and grime covering what should have been a noble coat. His legs were bound tightly with electrical cords, the plastic cuttings so deep it disappeared into the flesh. One paw was twisted at a strange angle, possibly broken. Flies buzzed around his face, but he was still breathing. Barely. Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God!" The dog didn't move, except for the faintest tremble of his chest, shallow, erratic breaths like a flickering candle about to burn out. But he opened his eyes and looked at her. Those eyes, sunken, glassy, but filled with something more than just pain. There was fear, but there was also hope. Rachel couldn't understand how such eyes could still believe in anything. "Mommy," Emily whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the wind. "We have to help him." Rachel's instincts kicked in. She shrugged off her coat and gently slid it under the dog's limp body, careful not to jostle the twisted limbs. The animal whimpered but didn't resist. He had no strength left. Emily knelt and placed her small hand on the dog's paw. "He's cold," she said softly, as if speaking to a friend. Rachel hesitated. She had no medical training, no idea what to do next. Was she supposed to wait for animal control? Was it even legal to move an animal in this condition? But something inside her, something fierce and protective, pushed all those questions aside. "We're not waiting," she said aloud. "We're not letting him die here." Within minutes, they were in the car. Rachel wrapped Emily's favorite fleece blanket around the dog's frail body. Emily sat in the back seat, cradling his head in her lap as Rachel sped through the streets like she was running from a crime scene. In a way, she was. The nearest veterinary emergency clinic was 15 minutes away. Every red light felt like betrayal. Every second, Rachel checked the rearview mirror. Emily never looked up. She just kept whispering softly to the animal in her lap. "You're gonna be okay now. You're not garbage. You're a good boy. I promise." Rachel blinked hard, trying to see the road through tears. Her daughter, who still believed in fairies and made birthday cards for trees, was comforting a dying animal someone had thrown away like leftover food. The contrast broke something open inside her. They pulled into the vet clinic's parking lot like a storm, brakes squealing, doors flung open. Rachel ran in, breathless, yelling for help. Within seconds, 2 techs came rushing out with a gurney. They lifted the dog gently from the back seat. One of them flinched at the smell, but said nothing. Professionals. They moved with the quiet urgency of people who had seen this too many times, but it still hurt every time. Rachel and Emily were asked to wait in the front office. The minutes passed like hours. Emily sat in a hard plastic chair, legs dangling, staring at the door the gurney had disappeared through. Rachel paced, then stopped, then sat, then stood again. She wanted answers, but mostly she wanted that dog to live. She didn't know why. She just did. After what felt like forever, the vet came out. He was an older man with silver hair and the kind of eyes that had learned how to deliver bad news with kindness. "He's stable," he said. "Barely. Severe dehydration. Starvation. Multiple infected wounds. A dislocated shoulder and 1 healed fracture from a long time ago." Rachel exhaled shakily. "Is he going to survive?" The vet paused. "I honestly don't know. It depends on whether he wants to." Rachel frowned. "What does that mean?" "Some dogs, when they've been through too much, they give up. Even if we fix the body, the mind, sometimes it's just too broken." Emily stood up. "But he looked at me," she said. "He wanted help." The vet turned to her, softening. "Then maybe that's enough." They were given the option to surrender the dog to a shelter for medical treatment and adoption. But Rachel didn't even need a minute. "No," she said firmly. "He's staying with us. At least until he knows he's safe." The vet nodded. "All right, but be ready, it won't be easy. He may not trust humans ever again." Rachel looked down at Emily, who was clutching the edge of her sweater with chalk-stained fingers. "He'll trust her," Rachel said quietly. "She's the one who found him." And so, with pain still clinging to his fragile body, the German Shepherd began a new chapter, one wrapped in blankets, driven by love, and carried on the fragile hope of a 6-year-old girl who refused to look away. They still didn't know his name. They didn't know where he came from. They didn't know that this wasn't just a case of cruelty. It was the start of unraveling something much darker, much deeper. But for now, he was alive. And that was enough. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, sharp, clean, sterile. A stark contrast to the filth and blood they'd peeled off the dog just hours earlier. Inside the quiet recovery room at the back of the clinic, time felt suspended. Machines beeped softly. Shadows from the overhead lights stretched across the floor like tired hands reaching for something they couldn't hold. Rachel stood stiffly, arms crossed, trying to make sense of the vet's words. Severely malnourished. Possibly tortured. He's days, maybe hours, away from organ failure. The way the doctor said it, calm but heavy, felt like a sentence being handed down. Not just to the dog, but to her daughter too. Behind the glass window, the dog lay motionless on a small padded table. For tubes ran from his legs to a bag overhead. His breathing was labored, shallow. He looked less like an animal and more like a question the world had tried to bury, one no one wanted to answer. But Emily saw something else. She stepped closer to the glass, her small hand resting on the window like she could touch him through it. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes said everything. She didn't see a dying dog. She saw someone who had been forgotten, who needed someone, anyone, to fight for him. "Can I go in?" she asked softly. The vet hesitated. "He's sedated and fragile." "It's not." "I'll be quiet," Emily interrupted. "I promise." Rachel looked at the doctor, and he gave a small nod. Minutes later, Emily was inside the room, kneeling beside the metal kennel where the dog had been gently moved. The wires were still attached, fluid still dripping. But something had changed. As Emily approached, the dog stirred, not much, just a twitch of his head. His nose flared faintly in her direction, as if he recognized the scent of chalk and bubblegum and trust. She reached through the open bars of the kennel with hands so small, so gentle, it was as if she were offering the kind of touch he hadn't felt in years, one that meant no pain. Her fingers brushed lightly against his fur, crusted and rough. She leaned in close and whispered, "You're safe now." His ears didn't perk up. He didn't lift his head. But his tail, weak, thin, barely more than a thread, gave a single flick against the bedding. Rachel, watching through the window, gasped. So did the vet. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "I did," the vet replied, blinking. "That shouldn't have happened." "Not yet." Emily smiled, not big, not bright, but with quiet confidence. She already knew. She sat on the floor beside the kennel and didn't ask to leave. For the next few hours, she stayed. She didn't talk much, just hummed softly, sometimes reciting parts of the bedtime stories she loved. The dog, still too weak to move, would blink slowly when she spoke, as if taking comfort in the sound, like it was the first language he understood in a long time. By evening, Emily had given him a name. "Shadow," she said simply, "because he looks like he's been hiding in one for a long time. But now he's in the light." Rachel ran her hand down her face, exhaustion catching up with her, but she nodded. "Shadow," she repeated softly. "It fits." The vet smiled faintly but still wore the guarded expression of someone who had seen too many stories like this end the wrong way. "If he makes it through the night, we'll know more. But I'll be honest, his chances are slim." Emily didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just looked at Shadow and said, "I'll come back tomorrow. You better be here." And he was. He made it through the night. Barely, but he did. The next morning, Emily returned with a worn copy of Charlotte's Web and a plastic daisy she had pulled from her hairbrush drawer, the only kind of flower she could find. She placed it beside his kennel and began to read. Her small voice echoed in the room softly, wrapping around the dog like a blanket. The nurses didn't stop her. The vet didn't interfere. They all watched something rare, something sacred, begin to unfold. Shadow blinked more often now. He would turn his head slightly when Emily entered. On the third day, he licked water from a spoon. On the fourth, he tried to lift his head. He still couldn't stand. His ribs still jutted from his skin like broken piano keys. But he was trying. And Emily never left his side. She brought drawings taped to the kennel walls, crayon versions of Shadow smiling, standing in fields, wearing a superhero cape. "That's you when you get better," she explained. "You'll be strong again. You'll chase squirrels. You'll sleep on a real bed." Rachel marveled at her daughter's patience. The girl who usually couldn't sit still for 5 minutes could now sit in silence for hours beside a dog who might not make it. But there was something unspoken between them, a kind of language that only two broken beings could share. Something deeper than words, older than fear. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was someone, a victim, a survivor, a soul that had been pushed aside, beaten, silenced, until a little girl found him and reminded him how to be seen again. Every day, Emily asked the vet the same question, "Can we take him home yet?" And every day, the vet gave her the same answer, "Not yet. But he's fighting, just like you are." Shadow's story was no longer just about survival. It was about connection. It was about healing. And it was just beginning. The clinic had become a second home. Day by day, Shadow's eyes opened wider, his breath steadied, and he even managed to lift his head and sniff the air when Emily entered. But recovery, the vet reminded them gently, wasn't just about wagging tails or taking a sip of water. It was about uncovering what couldn't be seen, the damage hiding beneath fur and silence. The scans were brutal. Emily wasn't in the room when the vet went over the results. Rachel sat stiffly in the consultation chair, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if she were trying to hold herself together. The vet's voice was even, clinical, but his eyes betrayed him. "There are signs of multiple healed fractures," he began. "Front right leg, rear hip, 2 ribs, at different stages of recovery. These weren't recent. They happened over time." Rachel didn't speak. Her jaw tightened. "There are burn scars," he continued, adjusting the tablet in his hand. "Pattern suggests either hot surfaces or possibly chemical exposure. His belly shows tissue damage, symmetrical, which tells me it was likely intentional. And the blood work indicates long-term malnutrition. He wasn't starved for a few days. This dog was barely surviving for years." The room went quiet. Rachel let the words settle, then asked, "Are we still calling this abuse?" The vet met her eyes directly. "We're calling this torture." It was the kind of word that left no room for misunderstanding. It didn't imply neglect. It didn't suggest accident. It accused. Rachel felt her stomach churn. It wasn't just about the monster who did this. It was about how no one had stopped them. How this creature had been brutalized again and again, in a world full of people who must have heard the barking, the cries, the silence afterward, and chose to look away. That evening, she filed an official report with the county's Animal Welfare Department. She attached every photo the vet had taken, signed every page without hesitation, and listed herself as the one willing to foster Shadow, for as long as it took. Maybe forever. She didn't tell Emily about the details. Not yet. But Shadow did. In his own way, he showed the girl things she couldn't have understood yet. One night, when she brushed a soft towel along his back, he flinched, not violently, but sharply enough to freeze her hand midair. Another time, she reached for a treat with one hand while holding her belt with the other. Shadow shrank into the corner, eyes wide, breath shallow, legs trembling. Emily didn't say anything. She simply dropped the belt to the floor, sat cross-legged beside him, and placed the treat down gently between them. "It's okay," she whispered. "We don't hurt here." But the worst reaction came 2 days later, when a police officer stopped by the clinic to follow up on the report. It was meant to be routine. Paperwork. Questions. A few forms. Rachel met him at the front counter while Emily sat with Shadow in the side room. The officer, young, polite, clearly doing his job, walked into the room to peek at the dog they were talking about. Shadow didn't bark. He launched. Not to attack, but to flee. He thrashed in his bed, the foreline yanked nearly out, growling like an animal cornered in fire. He backed against the wall, eyes wild, body shaking uncontrollably. Emily shouted his name, But he couldn't hear it. The uniform was all he saw. The badge. The boots. The past. It took 5 minutes to calm him down. When they finally did, he collapsed from exhaustion, drooling and panting, his heart racing. The officer left quietly after that, shaken. Rachel stared after him, something cold forming in her chest. They knew what they were doing, she muttered later that night. Whoever did this, they weren't just cruel. They were practiced. She wasn't wrong. The scars weren't random. They told a story, a terrible, systematic story of someone who inflicted pain slowly, consistently, and with intent to break not just the body, but the spirit. The healed fractures, the burn patterns, the fear of specific items, they all pointed to someone experienced in punishment, in control, in silence. Shadow wasn't afraid of people. He was afraid of authority. Rachel sat in bed that night, unable to sleep, scrolling through local reports, cold cases, online forums, anything that might link a missing dog to a household, a neighbor, a family. There were no microchips, no collar, no flyers ever posted about a missing shepherd. It was like he'd never existed at all. But someone had owned him. Someone had named him, trained him, tied him, broken him, and finally thrown him away. The next morning, Rachel walked into the kitchen to find Emily sitting on the floor beside Shadow's makeshift bed. He rested his chin on her lap, eyes closed, tail twitching. "I think he's starting to dream," Emily said. Rachel knelt down. "What do you think he dreams about?" Emily looked up, her expression serious. "About not being afraid." Rachel wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulled her close, and kissed the top of her head. She couldn't erase the scars on that dog's body. But maybe, just maybe, they could erase the ones in his heart. And she promised herself, whoever had done this, they hadn't seen the last of her. In a town like Mayfield, word spread faster than wind through dry leaves. And when something unusual happened, like a little girl rescuing a nearly dead German shepherd from a trash bag, it didn't just become news, it became folklore. At first, it was all kindness. A few neighbors dropped off bags of dog food on the porch without knocking. Someone left a basket filled with soft towels and chew toys. A couple of school teachers sent notes praising Emily for her compassion and bravery. For a moment, it felt like goodness had bloomed in the wake of cruelty. That maybe this one act of love had reminded the town what decency looked like. But goodness has a short attention span. Within a week, the tone changed. Rachel noticed it first at the grocery store. A woman she barely knew stopped in the cereal aisle and said, with a tight smile, "You know, some people say you staged the whole thing. Just for attention." Rachel blinked. "Excuse me?" The woman shrugged, her voice light, almost amused. "I'm just saying. It's quite a story, isn't it? A child, a trash bag, a dying dog? Sounds more like something off TV." Rachel didn't respond. She just walked away. But the woman's words clung to her like a bad smell. By the next week, it got worse. Someone slipped an anonymous note under the front door. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. "Your daughter doesn't need the spotlight. Some people raise their kids quietly." Then came another. "Poor Mutt's probably just another stray. Don't turn it into a circus." Rachel burned them both in the fireplace. But the smoke didn't take away the sting. She kept it from Emily. She didn't want the light in her daughter's eyes dimmed by shadows she didn't deserve. Emily was still spending every afternoon at the clinic, sitting beside Shadow, who was now strong enough to lift his head when she entered, and even give a slow wag of his tail. The bond between them had deepened, quiet, wordless, and unshakable. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that someone didn't want Shadow to be seen. That his suffering was more than just a tragedy, it was a secret someone wanted buried again. The town whispered, "She's a single mom, Probably lonely. Maybe the dog wasn't even in the bag. Some people will do anything for likes online. Rachel didn't care about online. She didn't post updates, didn't chase followers. But rumors don't need the internet to survive. They just need mouths that move faster than minds. Then one morning, while Rachel was walking Shadow around the vet's side yard, slow steps, still shaky, but steps nonetheless, an older woman approached. She wore a long gray coat and moved with the stiffness of someone who used to walk briskly and now carried the memory of that pace in her bones. She had kind eyes and a face full of quiet years. Her name was Mrs. Langford. She lived 4 houses down from Rachel's, the house with the blue hydrangeas and wind chimes that never stopped singing. Rachel smiled politely. "Good morning." Mrs. Langford didn't return the greeting. She just stared at Shadow. Then she said, very softly, "That dog looks familiar." Rachel hesitated. "Oh." The woman nodded. Her voice trembled slightly. I think he used to live on Willow Street. In that old brick house near the dead end. The one with the red shutters." Rachel's breath caught. "You're sure?" she asked carefully. "I'm not," Mrs. Langford admitted. "But I remember a boy. And a big German shepherd. Always together. You couldn't see one without the other." Rachel waited. "They lived there for a while," Mrs. Langford continued, her eyes distant now. "Nice family, or so people thought. But then we started hearing things. Loud arguments. Broken glass. Screaming. Once, I swear I heard a child crying for help." Rachel's stomach turned. "What happened?" she asked. "One day they were just gone," the woman said. "No moving truck. No goodbyes. Just silence. The house sat empty after that. Still does." Rachel tried to keep her voice even. "Do you remember the boy's name?" Mrs. Langford frowned, thinking. "Benji, maybe? Benny? He used to wave when he passed my garden. Always looked scared." The name didn't mean anything to Rachel, not yet. But the image did. A boy and a dog. Always together. Until they weren't. As Rachel thanked Mrs. Langford and led Shadow back to the car, her mind raced. She could feel the edges of something forming, a thread being pulled loose from a tightly woven lie. Shadow didn't come from nowhere. He came from pain. From a place that had swallowed him whole and spit him out in a trash bag. And now, someone in town didn't want the truth to come out. Later that night, as Emily slept curled up with her stuffed animals and Shadow dozed gently at the foot of her bed, tail occasionally flicking, legs twitching in dream, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. She wrote one word at the top. Willow. Then she started digging. Rachel had heard stories about Willow Street before, mostly from elderly neighbors who loved to gossip over back fences and folded newspapers. But now, those whispers had faces, names, and pain attached. After Mrs. Langford had nervously shared what she remembered, Rachel couldn't sit still. Something about the way the woman's voice trembled, the way her eyes stayed fixed on Shadow's face, as if she were seeing a ghost instead of a dog, it all haunted Rachel more than she wanted to admit. So the very next morning, she followed the lead, driving slowly down the narrow, tree-lined lane that led to the end of Willow Street. The moment she reached the last house, a squat, brick structure with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch, she knew she was in the right place. The house stood like a memory that refused to fade, worn down by time but stubbornly still standing. Paint peeled off in wide strips, revealing layers of neglect beneath. The once white door was now an off-color gray, the kind that comes not from design but from being forgotten. Grass had long given up on growing, replaced by tangled weeds and broken toys half buried in dirt. A child's tricycle, rusted and tilted on its side, leaned against the fence like it had been frozen in time. The mailbox was gone. No name, no number, just a silence so heavy, It pressed against Rachel's chest. She parked her car across the street and sat for a moment, unsure of what she was looking for. Shadow, sitting in the back seat, stared out the window with an intensity she hadn't seen before. His ears twitched. His body tensed slightly. It was subtle, but Rachel noticed. Something about this place was familiar to him. She stepped out and gently opened the back door. Shadow didn't whine or bark. He simply looked at the house and then at her. She nodded once, a silent promise. She wouldn't rush. They would take this slow. The air smelled of mold and dust and old leaves. Each step Rachel took felt heavier than the last. The porch creaked beneath her feet. She peeked through a crack in the boarded-up front window, but the inside was just as lifeless as the exterior. No furniture, no curtains, just shadows. Still, she felt something watching her. She walked along the side of the house and froze when she saw it. A small wooden doghouse tucked beneath a collapsed tree branch in the backyard, barely standing. The roof had caved slightly, and vines had wrapped around its corners. But there, carved clumsily into the wood above the entrance, was a name. Shadow. Her breath caught in her throat. The letters were jagged, uneven, like a child's hand had made them. Not painted, not printed. Etched, as if with a knife or sharp stone. It wasn't decoration. It was a statement. A declaration. This was his home once. She knelt beside the doghouse and reached out to touch the name, brushing away the dirt and moss with her fingers. For a moment, everything around her disappeared. The cold air, the creaking trees, even the ache in her chest. All she could see was a younger Shadow, alive and healthy, curling up in that very spot while a child giggled nearby, telling him secrets only a dog could understand. She tried to picture the boy Mrs. Langford had described, a child with fear in his eyes and bruises hidden beneath his sleeves, and the thought made her stomach turn. Rachel stood up and took one last look at the house. There were no signs of a forced exit, no foreclosure signs, no sale listings. Just emptiness, like a chapter ripped out of a book. It didn't make sense. Families didn't just disappear. People didn't just vanish in the middle of the night. But this one had. And whoever they were, they had left something behind. Not just a dog, but a story. That night, long after Emily had gone to bed and Shadow was curled beside her in his usual spot, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a dozen tabs blinking across the screen. She wasn't tech-savvy, but she knew how to dig when something didn't feel right. She searched local archives, real estate records, school enrollment logs, anything that might trace the family that once lived in that house. At first, all she found were dead ends. The property tax record was still in the name of a Shell LLC, with no contact information listed. No one had lived there legally in years. But then she found something. Buried deep within an old PDF archive from the Mayfield Chronicle, she discovered a short, 2-paragraph article dated 3 years ago. The headline was unassuming. Domestic disturbance, no arrests made, children moved into custody. The words sent a chill through her. According to the report, neighbors had called 911 several times over the course of a month, reporting shouting, crashing, and what was described as violent disruptions at a residence on Willow Street. When police arrived one night, they found a disheveled home and 2 terrified boys, ages 8 and 11. No arrests were made due to lack of physical evidence, but Child Protective Services removed the children from the home. The family never returned. No names were listed. No follow-up stories appeared. Rachel sat back in her chair, eyes still glued to the screen. The report was vague, too vague. It was like someone had written just enough to acknowledge the incident, but not enough to leave a trail. There was no mention of a dog. No mention of abuse. Just a vague line about disruptive behavior and a house left behind. She looked down at Shadow, who stirred in his sleep at her feet, his legs twitching gently as if running through dreams. His breathing was calm, peaceful. But the moment she whispered his name, his eyes opened slowly. He didn't panic. He didn't startle. He just looked at her, and for a moment, she saw something there that hadn't been present before. Not just pain, recognition. Rachel placed her hand on his head and whispered, "We're going to figure out what happened. I promise." She opened a notebook and began jotting things down. 2 boys, unknown names. One aged 8. One aged 11. House abandoned. No arrests. Shadow left behind. The doghouse. The carved name. The silence. The missing years. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew something was being hidden. Something no one wanted unearthed. The past had left a mark. Not just on the house. Not just on the boys. But on the animal they abandoned. The one now curled up in the bedroom of a little girl who refused to stop loving him. And Rachel, who had only meant to help a broken dog survive, now found herself standing at the edge of something far more complicated, a story long buried, waiting to be told. Some truths don't shout. They wait in silence, buried under red tape, forgotten documents, and locked drawers no one wants to open again. But Rachel was no longer just a concerned neighbor or a single mother trying to do the right thing. She was in this now, heart, mind, and gut, and she wasn't going to stop just because the trail was cold. Shadow deserved more than that. He deserved to be more than a mystery. He deserved the truth. The local shelters had turned up nothing. No missing pet reports matched Shadow's description. No one had come forward. But Rachel refused to believe a family could vanish into thin air, especially not one that left behind a house, a story, and a dog with wounds that ran deeper than flesh. So she reached out to a rescue network she'd come across online, a quiet community of animal lovers, former social workers, and private investigators who'd seen things like this before. People who knew how to find stories when the system had long since forgotten them. One of them, a retired court clerk named Melinda, replied within hours. She remembered the Willow Street case. She'd handled intake paperwork years ago. She even remembered the names, though she couldn't say much without proper clearance. But after a few more emails and a carefully worded phone call, Melinda made a quiet offer. "I might be able to get you something," she said. "No promises. But you didn't hear it from me." A week passed. Then one afternoon, Rachel found a plain manila envelope in her mailbox. No return address, no note. Just a single paperclip holding it closed. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it at the kitchen table. Inside were copies of sealed juvenile court documents. Records not meant for the public, stamped confidential in faded ink. She felt a pang of guilt for reading them, but that quickly gave way to something else, heartbreak. There, in the middle of the file, was a photo. It was old and slightly blurry, as if it had been printed from a home scanner. In it, a small boy with shaggy brown hair sat in a sunlit backyard, grinning wide as he hugged a German Shepherd puppy. The pup's ears were too big for its head, and its tongue lolled sideways in a goofy, joyful way that only puppies manage. They looked inseparable. On the back of the photo, written in faint pencil, were 5 words: Benji and Shadow, age 8. Rachel stared at it for a long time. The dog in the photo wasn't just similar to Shadow, it was him. Same deep-set eyes. Same markings near the ear. Same soulful, searching gaze. She traced her fingers over the boy's smile, trying to imagine what kind of life they'd had together. And then, more painfully, what must have happened when it all came crashing down. She flipped through the rest of the papers, her eyes scanning page after page of heartbreak masked in legal language. Physical abuse allegations. Substance abuse within the home. Multiple domestic disturbances. A social worker's note describing the children as withdrawn, fearful, highly protective of each other. Another noting that a dog had been present during a home inspection. A young German Shepherd, very thin, possibly underfed, but no action had been taken. And then silence. No record of where the dog went. No mention in the removal orders. No surrender to a shelter. No documentation at all. Rachel leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as the truth settled around her like thick smoke. Shadow hadn't been lost. He hadn't run away. He had been left, discarded like trash, when the system tore the family apart. Whatever chaos had unfolded inside that house, when it was over, they walked away and left him behind. He had been 8 years old, a puppy raised alongside a child who, for all his fear and bruises, had loved him deeply. But love hadn't saved either of them. The bag, the wires, the burn marks, the healed fractures. It all made sense now. Shadow had endured years of neglect and pain, perhaps in silence, perhaps protecting those boys as best he could. And when the family was pulled apart, no one had come for him. No one had looked back. Rachel placed the photo on the table and turned to look at Shadow, sleeping in the sun near the sliding glass door. He looked peaceful now, more so than he had ever been since they found him. His fur was growing back. His frame, though still thin, had strength returning. And in his eyes, when he looked at Emily, there was no fear anymore, only loyalty, only love. She thought of the boy in the photo. Benji. Where was he now? Was he safe? Did he ever wonder what happened to the dog who used to sleep at the foot of his bed and lick his tears away when things got bad? Rachel stood up and picked up the photo, holding it to her chest. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if the truth would ever fully come out. But she knew one thing with certainty now: Shadow wasn't just a stray. He was a survivor, a forgotten family member, a soul who had once been loved and then left behind. And somehow he had endured. She looked out the window at the quiet street. The same town that had ignored his cries for help was now unknowingly witnessing his healing. But Rachel wouldn't let his story be buried again. She would find a way to honor what he'd been through, and maybe, just maybe, find the boy who once carved his name into a doghouse and whispered secrets into his floppy ears. Because no one deserved to be forgotten. Not a child, not a dog, not a bond that once saved two hearts from breaking. And in the quiet of her kitchen, holding a decades-old photograph and wiping a tear from her cheek, Rachel whispered into the stillness, "We remember you, Benji." He made it. Shadow made it. For a little while, it almost felt like everything would be okay. Shadow had begun walking with more strength. He responded to his name. He even chased a ball once, clumsily, his legs still too thin, but his eyes filled with a flicker of the dog he had once been. Rachel started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. That hope, the quiet kind that creeps in when no one's looking, had started to take root in their home. And then the seizures began. The first one came in the middle of the night. A loud bang echoed from outside, maybe a firecracker or a passing truck, and within seconds, Shadow was on the floor, convulsing. His legs stiffened, his body jerked violently, and foam began to gather at the corners of his mouth. Emily woke up screaming, rushing to his side, not knowing what to do. Rachel held him down gently, whispering to him, tears streaking her face, trying not to panic. It lasted under a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. The vet confirmed what Rachel had feared. Shadow's body was healing, yes, but his mind was still trapped. "This isn't just physical," the vet said gently, tapping the chart with a pen. "His trauma is psychological. What he experienced didn't just break his body, it rewired his brain. Certain sounds, smells, patterns, they trigger panic, confusion, seizures even." Rachel asked the hard question, "Is this permanent?" "Maybe, maybe not," the vet replied. "With time, structure, love, Some dogs recover. Others don't. You're doing everything right. But if it gets worse, we may need to discuss long-term care. There are trauma shelters, safe places, specialized environments. The words hung in the air long after the appointment ended. Trauma shelter. It sounded like a cage wrapped in kindness. Rachel didn't tell Emily right away. She didn't have the heart. But over the next few days, the episodes got more frequent. Not always seizures, sometimes just terror. Shadow would bark uncontrollably at the smallest noise. A pan falling in the kitchen, a siren in the distance, a man's voice on TV. His food bowl remained full, untouched. His body, once curled beside Emily in sleep, now pressed into the far corner of the living room, eyes wide, tail limp, as if waiting for something, someone, to strike. Rachel sat at the edge of her bed one night, staring at the phone number of the trauma shelter the vet had given her. Her thumb hovered over the dial. She wasn't giving up. She was trying to be responsible, trying to protect her daughter. But it felt like betrayal. It felt like sending someone back into the dark after they had finally found a sliver of light. Before she could press the button, Emily walked in. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked at her mom, then at the phone in her hand, then turned and walked to Shadow's corner. She knelt down beside him, her small arms wrapping gently around his neck. Shadow didn't flinch. He didn't move either, but he let her stay. Emily looked over her shoulder and said, "We're not giving him away." Rachel sighed. "Honey, it's not that simple. He's hurting. He's afraid all the time. Maybe he needs more than we can give." "He needs us," Emily whispered. "That's all he's ever needed." That night, Emily made a decision. She dragged her sleeping bag into the living room and placed it next to Shadow. She brought her favorite books, a flashlight, and her blanket with stars on it. Every night from then on, she stayed with him. She read aloud from her books, fairy tales, bedtime stories, anything with happy endings. She sang lullabies, even if she forgot half the words. And when he whimpered in his sleep, she whispered into his ear, "You're not alone anymore." Days passed. The barking lessened. The panic faded little by little. He started eating again, slowly at first, just bites, but it was something. He didn't rush to the corner when a door slammed. He didn't cry in his sleep as often. And one afternoon, as Emily lay beside him reading aloud from the Velveteen Rabbit, something miraculous happened. His tail moved. Just once, a small, lazy wag. But it was real. It was purposeful. It was hope. Rachel, watching from the doorway, covered her mouth to keep from crying. Shadow hadn't just heard Emily's voice. He had felt it. Felt safe. Felt home. There was no switch, no sudden transformation. Healing didn't happen like that. It was slow, messy, uneven. But it was happening. Emily never gave up. Not once. She showed him every single day that he wasn't broken, just bruised. That he wasn't dangerous, just scared. That he wasn't alone, not anymore. And Shadow? He started showing up again. He followed her from room to room. He placed his head on her lap during dinner. He pawed gently at the door when she left for school. And every night he curled beside her again, not in the corner, not hidden, but in the open, where the light reached. The darkness hadn't left him completely. It probably never would. But it no longer controlled him. And as Rachel stood by the doorway one evening, watching her daughter and the dog she'd rescued lie together in a tangle of blankets and healing, she realized something. Shadow hadn't just been saved. He was teaching them how to survive, too, how to keep showing up even when it hurts. He was still scared, still scarred. But now, when Emily whispered, "You're safe," he believed her. And for the first time in years, the echoes in his mind were quieter than the love that surrounded him. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. came slowly, in whispers, in moments so small that most people would have missed them. But Rachel saw them. Emily felt them. And Shadow, in his quiet, gentle way, lived them. Each step forward was a triumph, not because it was grand, but because it was real. It started in the backyard. One morning, Emily opened the back door and stepped out barefoot onto the dew-covered grass. She called softly, not expecting much, but hoping. Shadow peeked his head around the corner of the living room, hesitant at first, his paws uncertain. The open door had always been a source of fear, a reminder of abandonment, of the unknown. But that day, something was different. He took one step forward, then another. And then, as Emily crouched down with open arms, he walked past the threshold and into the yard. It wasn't a long walk, just a few feet, but it was his first, his choice. Rachel watched from the kitchen window, her heart catching in her throat. It looked so simple from the outside, a dog walking through a door. But for them, it was a miracle. He sniffed the grass. He stretched. He even rolled on his side once, letting the sun hit his belly in a way that said, "I might be okay." After that, things began to change, subtly, beautifully. Shadow started eating with Emily in the room. At first, he only took a few bites when she wasn't looking. Then one day, as she sat cross-legged on the floor, reading aloud like she always did, he wandered to his bowl and ate while she turned the page. There was no celebration, no camera, just quiet pride. Emily smiled, her voice never breaking, as if to say, "I knew you could." Loud sounds still startled him, but the panic began to fade. When Rachel vacuumed, he no longer barked or bolted to the corner. He simply moved to the hallway and watched. The trust was there now, not just in Emily, but in the space around him. The house was no longer a place of fear. It was a home. Rachel, inspired by everything Shadow had survived, and everything her daughter had helped him overcome, found herself longing to do more. She joined a local rescue volunteer network, the same one that had helped her connect the dots about Shadow's past. At first, she just offered to drive supplies. Then she began fostering animals short-term. It was hard work, but meaningful. And every time she looked at Shadow, now healthy, now strong, she remembered why it mattered. Emily, too, had grown in quiet, remarkable ways. One day, her teacher asked students to share something they had done that made them proud. Most kids talked about winning a soccer game or getting an A on a test. Emily stood up, held her hands tightly in front of her, and told the story of the dog she found in a trash bag. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. About the fear, the pain, the slow healing, and the love. There wasn't a sound in the room when she finished. And then, something unexpected happened. The next day, donations started coming in. Small things, mostly old towels, dog treats, collars, handwritten notes. One boy gave her $5 in an envelope and said, "For your dog's food." The school counselor reached out, asking if Emily and Rachel would like to speak at the next parent night. Word spread quickly after that. The little girl who rescued a dog in a trash bag was now inspiring an entire community. Even the neighbors who once whispered behind curtains had started to soften. A woman 2 doors down offered to build a ramp for Shadow so he could get into the backyard more easily. Another man, who had once muttered about taking in strays, dropped off a box of brand new toys and simply said, "He deserves better." Rachel marveled at it all. Not because of the attention, she never sought that, but because kindness had grown from something so brutal, so broken. The same town that had judged them was now learning from them. Hearts were opening, minds were changing, and at the center of it all stood a girl and her dog, survivors both. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and violet, Rachel sat on the back steps with a cup of tea. Emily lay on a blanket in the grass, reading aloud while Shadow rested beside her, his head on her stomach, his tail brushing the ground every now and then. The scene looked like something from a storybook, too soft to be real, too good to come from something so dark. But it was real, and it was earned. Rachel thought back to the first day. The alley, the garbage bag, the broken creature inside. She remembered the smell, the silence, the way her daughter didn't hesitate. And now, sitting here, weeks later, watching a girl and her dog find peace in a world that had once failed them both, she knew something had shifted permanently. Not just in Shadow, not just in Emily, but in her. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about rewriting what came next. Step by step, breath by breath. Together. Some stories demand justice with noise, courtroom scenes, handcuffs, headlines. But others move differently. Quietly, gently, like the soft rustling of leaves after a storm. Rachel had come to understand that now. She hadn't set out to uncover a mystery, to chase old ghosts, or to fight for accountability in a world that often forgets the voiceless. All she had wanted was to save a dog her daughter had found in a trash bag. But here they were, weeks later, holding pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, told a story no one could ignore. Rachel sat at the long, cold table inside the county animal welfare office, her hands resting over the manila envelope she had assembled over the past month. It contained everything: copies of Shadow's vet records, photographs of his healed wounds and visible scars, a printed version of the article she had found from years ago, and most importantly, the picture of Benji holding a young Shadow, smiling wide with the pure joy only children and puppies know. It was a story in snapshots, and it was time someone else saw it too. The officer across from her, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes but a steady presence, read through the papers slowly, carefully. She didn't speak for a long time. Occasionally she nodded. Occasionally her eyebrows furrowed. When she finally looked up, her voice was measured but sincere. "This is a lot," she said, "and it's compelling. The dates align. The injuries are consistent. And that photo, it's hard to argue with it." Rachel exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. "But," the officer continued, choosing her words with care, "we're dealing with a lapsed case. Over 3 years ago. The family is long gone. No legal charges were filed back then. No names documented. Which means no arrests," Rachel finished for her. She didn't sound angry, just tired. She had prepared herself for this. The woman nodded. "No arrests. No formal charges. But that doesn't mean we ignore it. I'm reopening the case and filing it as an unsolved cruelty report. It'll be official, documented. His file won't end in a trash bag. It'll end with the word survivor. That matters. More than you think." Rachel felt a lump rise in her throat. It wasn't justice in the way movies paint it. There were no dramatic verdicts, no villains dragged away in handcuffs. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was history corrected. Shadow's story would not be erased. Later that week, the local newspaper, the same one that had once buried a 2-paragraph report about a domestic disturbance, printed a new story. This time, it was on the front page of the community section. There were no names, no addresses, no direct accusations. Just a photo of Shadow lying peacefully on the grass, his eyes closed, tail curled beside him, Emily's small hand resting gently on his back. The headline read, "This is what survival looks like." The article told the story plainly. A child, a trash bag, a dog nearly lost to cruelty, and the slow, stubborn process of healing that followed. It described the trauma he had endured, the signs of long-term abuse, and the quiet strength of a little girl who refused to give up. It didn't sensationalize. It honored. People read it. People talked, not in the way they had weeks earlier, with suspicion or whispered judgment. This time, there was something else in their voices: reflection. Maybe admiration, certainly. Donations to local shelters increased. Volunteer sign-ups doubled. Teachers at Emily's school began using the story as a lesson in empathy. And more than one family quietly reached out, asking how they could help foster dogs that needed time and patience, like Shadow once did. The town had changed. Maybe not drastically, maybe not loudly, but meaningfully. Back home, Shadow didn't understand court documents or press coverage. He didn't know that his name now sat in a county file marked Survivor. But he felt it in the warmth of the house, in the softness of Emily's touch, in the way the world no longer startled him quite as much. His tail wagged more now, not just when called, but spontaneously, like joy was no longer something he had to borrow, but something he owned again. Rachel watched him often, sometimes from across the room, sometimes from the doorway of Emily's room, where he now slept every night. She saw the dog he had become, still cautious, still scarred, but full of quiet strength. She thought about the boy in the photo, Benji. Somewhere out there, he might still wonder what happened to his dog. He might not know that Shadow had survived, that he was loved, that he had found a new little girl who held him through the darkness and sang him back into the light. Rachel hoped that one day, somehow, Benji would find out. But even if he didn't, she knew the bond they once shared had been honored. Not erased. Not forgotten. One evening, as the house grew still and the sky turned the color of memory, Emily crawled into bed beside Shadow and wrapped her arms around him. He sighed, not in fear, but in contentment. And then, without being asked, he did something simple and perfect. He licked her cheek. Rachel stood in the hallway, unseen, smiling through tears. Justice hadn't come in a courtroom. It hadn't come with sirens. But it had come, in truth, in healing, in love that refused to give up. Sometimes, justice is silent, but that doesn't make it any less real. The days had grown longer. Summer had quietly slipped into the town, wrapping porches in warmth and filling the trees with birdsong again. In the backyard, Shadow now walked with a gentle limp, a remnant of injuries long since healed, but he walked proudly, tail high, eyes brighter. Life had found its rhythm. Rachel was fostering a second rescue dog now, and Emily had become the unofficial mascot of the shelter network. Their home had transformed into something quiet but powerful, a safe place, a space of second chances. And then one evening, the world changed again, this time with the soft ding of an email. Rachel almost didn't check it. It was late and she was tired. The subject line read only, Shadow. Inside the message was a single sentence, typed carefully and humbly, as if each word had been weighed before being shared. Hi. I think this might be my dog. I'm Benji. Her heart stopped. Attached to the email was a screenshot of the rescue article, the one the local paper had published weeks ago. The photo of Shadow curled peacefully beside Emily, a quiet portrait of survival. Rachel read the message again and again, fingers frozen on the mouse. Benji. She clicked reply, unsure of what she was supposed to say, and began typing slowly. Dear Benji, I think you're right. I think this is your Shadow. He wrote back within minutes. A 19-year-old college student from upstate, now studying animal behavior at a community college. He had been in and out of foster homes. Lost contact with his younger brother after they were separated. He hadn't had a real address of his own for years. But when someone in a volunteer group shared the article about Shadow's recovery, he stopped breathing for a second. He said he stared at the screen for almost an hour, not trusting his own eyes. The markings, the eyes, the name, everything came rushing back. He used to sleep next to me when I was scared, he wrote. I told him secrets I couldn't tell anyone else. He was the only one who knew everything. I thought he was gone. Rachel didn't know how to answer that kind of pain. So instead, she simply wrote, "Come. Please. Come." He booked a flight for Friday. The day he arrived, the house felt different. So, like it was holding its breath. Emily had spent the entire morning brushing Shadow, talking to him in soft tones, not fully understanding what was about to happen, only that it was big. Rachel baked muffins she knew no one would eat, her hands shaking as she set the tray on the counter. The moment the car pulled into the driveway, she looked out the window and froze. He was taller now, of course. Broader. His hair was longer, tied back in a simple knot. He wore a plain hoodie, jeans, and the cautious expression of someone who didn't know whether to hope or stay guarded. But his eyes hadn't changed. Rachel knew those eyes. They were the same ones in the photograph, just older, weathered, holding years of quiet questions. He didn't knock. Rachel opened the door before he reached the porch. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, Benji." For a second, they simply stood there, neither quite sure how to cross the distance between them. But it wasn't Rachel who did it, it was Shadow. He emerged from the hallway slowly, his steps uncertain, head low, as if sensing something big hung in the air. He looked at Benji and paused. The house went completely silent. Emily didn't move. Rachel didn't breathe. And then, Shadow took a step forward. Then another. No barking. No panic. Just quiet recognition. He reached Benji's feet, sniffed once, and looked up. Benji dropped to his knees and whispered, "Is it really you?" Shadow let out a soft sound, somewhere between a sigh and a whine, then leaned forward, pressed his head into Benji's chest, and collapsed into his lap. Not from fear, from trust. Tears streamed down Benji's face. He didn't sob. He didn't speak. He just held him. One hand on the dog's head, the other on his side, grounding himself in a moment he had once thought impossible. "You waited for me," he whispered, more to Shadow than to anyone else. "All this time, you waited." Rachel and Emily stood in the kitchen, wordless, watching a story complete itself without needing narration. They gave him time. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, Benji sat on the floor, Shadow still curled against him, and began to talk. Not to Rachel, not to Emily, to Shadow. He told him about the night they were separated, about the screaming, about how the officers told him to leave, and how he begged them not to leave Shadow behind. He talked about the first foster home and the second, how he had kept a photo of Shadow tucked in his shoe for 3 years, how he used to whisper his name before falling asleep. Rachel finally knelt beside him and asked gently, "Do you want to stay for a while?" Benji nodded, brushing tears from his cheek. "If that's okay. I need a few days." "Take as long as you want," Rachel said. Emily, quiet until then, reached out a hand and placed it softly on Benji's shoulder. He turned and smiled at her, and in that moment, a bridge was built, one between the past and present, between a boy and a girl who had both rescued the same dog at different times, for different reasons, but with the same kind of heart. That weekend, Benji stayed in the guest room. He walked Shadow in the morning and brushed him in the evening. He joined them for dinner and told stories about what Shadow used to do as a puppy, how he used to steal socks and hide them under the couch, how he once barked at a jack-o'-lantern until he tipped it over. Emily laughed and asked questions. Rachel listened and watched, grateful beyond words. On Sunday afternoon, as they sat on the porch and watched the sun dip behind the trees, Benji turned to Rachel. "I don't want to take him away," he said. This is his home now. You saved him. You brought him back to life." Rachel shook her head. "We just held on. You're his family." Benji smiled, eyes glistening. "Then maybe we both are." When he left, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning. He promised to visit often. And he did. Over the months that followed, he came back again and again. Sometimes for a weekend. Sometimes for a week. And each time, Shadow would wait by the door, tail thumping, eyes bright. The boy in the picture had grown into a man. But for Shadow, he was still the same. The one who had whispered secrets in the night, the one who carved his name into a doghouse, the one who never forgot. And now, neither would the world. In the end, it wasn't about who got to keep Shadow. It was about who had never let him go. Benji didn't ask for him back. He didn't plead or claim or question. He understood instinctively that the dog he had once loved, the puppy he had raised, now belonged to two hearts. One that remembered, and one that refused to let him be forgotten. So, a quiet arrangement was born. Not through lawyers or paperwork, but through shared love. Shadow lived between them. Two homes, two families, and one long thread of loyalty that stretched gently across the years. Sometimes he stayed with Rachel and Emily, basking in the comfort of the only bed he had ever fully relaxed in. Other times he traveled with Benji, curling up on a dorm room rug or sleeping peacefully in the back seat during long drives across state lines. Each time he shifted homes, there was no fear in his eyes. No panic, just trust. He knew now that coming or going didn't mean being left behind. It meant being loved enough to be welcomed in both directions. Rachel would smile watching Emily prepare his little travel bag. The squeaky toy, the blanket with faded stars, the old photo of him and Benji laminated and tucked in beside the treats. She never cried when he left because she knew he'd be back. And when he returned, it wasn't with fanfare. Just a soft knock, a door creaking open, and the familiar thump of his tail against the floorboards. Shadow had become more than a dog. He was a bridge between past and present, a thread that stitched together broken pieces. A quiet reminder that even stories that begin in darkness can find their way to light, if someone cares enough to guide them. Emily wanted people to know that. So, one evening, as Shadow lay curled beside her in the living room, his breathing steady, his muzzle now tinged with the soft gray of age, she picked up her camera. Not to go viral. Not for likes or followers. Just because she needed to tell the truth, her truth, and his. The video was simple. It opened with a blurry photo of a trash bag in an alley. Then her voice, small but steady, filled the silence. "I was 6 years old when I found him." She told the whole story, slowly, honestly, like she was sitting in front of one friend, not a camera. She talked about the alley, the sound of his whimper, the way he wouldn't stop shaking. She showed the photo of him the day they brought him home, thin, broken, wrapped in an old blanket. She included clips of his recovery, of his first steps in the backyard, of the time he fell asleep with his head on her math book, snoring gently while she tried to study. And then she talked about Benji, the boy in the picture, the one who hadn't forgotten. She showed the moment they reunited, not the full thing, just a quiet clip of Shadow nestled in Benji's lap, eyes closed, peaceful. And finally, she closed the video with her voice over a slow zoom on Shadow asleep beside her, the light falling softly across his fur. "Kindness doesn't just save lives," she said. "It saves stories." That was it. She didn't post it with hashtags or dramatic music. Just uploaded it quietly to her school's community page and shared it with the rescue network. But within hours, it began to spread. First through local groups, then through animal shelters, then beyond. Messages poured in. People shared their own stories of lost pets, of found hope. Teachers played the video in classrooms. A national rescue organization reached out, asking to feature it in their next campaign. News stations requested interviews, which Emily politely declined. Because the most important thing to her wasn't fame. It wasn't views. It wasn't even the recognition. It was the soft sound of Shadow's breath beside her each night, the way he still nudged her hand when she read aloud, the way his tail brushed against her when she stopped petting him, the way he leaned into her when she whispered, "You're home." For Rachel, too, the impact was quiet but lasting. She became a regular speaker for local animal rights panels. She helped train volunteers in trauma-informed animal care. Her kitchen wall now held a framed print of the article headline, "This is what survival looks like," next to Shadow's adoption certificate and a photo of Emily, Benji, and Shadow all sitting on the front steps together, the sun behind them. And Benji, now studying to become a veterinary technician, often said it best. "I thought I lost him, but it turns out he was never really gone. He just needed time to find his way back." Shadow grew older, as all living things do. His walks became shorter, his naps longer, his eyes a little foggier, but his spirit remained sharp. He still perked up at the sound of Emily's laugh, still rested his head on Benji's shoe when he sat by the door, still pressed his paw to Rachel's hand when she whispered, "Thank you." He never barked unnecessarily, never growled. It was as if he had learned that peace was fragile and precious, and he refused to disturb it. Years passed, but the promise never faded. Not the one Emily made in that alley. Not the one Benji carried in his heart all those years. Not the one Rachel silently vowed when she wrapped him in a blanket that first day. He would never be alone again. Shadow's story was no longer about pain or rescue or survival. It was about what came after, the quiet, extraordinary beauty of keeping a promise. And every night, as the lights dimmed and the house settled, that promise echoed in the simplest, most comforting sound Emily had ever known, the soft, steady rhythm of Shadow's snoring beside her. Finally free. Some things can't be explained, but they still make us believe. What did this story make you think? Let us know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more. Until next time, keep your heart open to the unexpected.